Okay, here's part two of what is it that this graphing calculator can do. So today we're going to take a look at some neat little tricks that you can do. Let's say you are um, doing a fairly complicated equation, and just let me punch this in. And sometimes these equations take a long time to put in, and we'll give it some window settings like from 0 to 100 and from 0 to 100 in the y direction as well, and we'll just make sure we're in a mode that'll graph it nicely. And here's some complicated function. And you realize while it's graphing, oh no, that's not what I want. I messed it up. I don't need those window settings. I want a different function, whatever. So I want to show you some tricks on changing some things. So let's say that your window setting was wrong. You really only needed to go to 50, and so you hit enter, and then you go to graph, and it starts graphing. You're like, no, 50. I didn't mean 50. If you turn off the computer, it actually doesn't turn it off. It just pauses the graphing. You don't have to wait for the whole thing to graph. And now you can just go into the window settings and be like, no, I meant 60. And you can graph, and you can be, okay, there we go. Oh, I must have made another mistake. So just pause that and go into the window settings. Okay, there's my mistake. I actually meant 60 on this one, and graph. And now we have our graph. And maybe you made a mistake. Oh, no, that's not the right graph. So you pause it and go into y equals. And you want to edit something in here. Like maybe this isn't -5, this is -10. And if you go along here and then you get to this one, you try to type 10, you're going to mess up these brackets. You're going to put a 1 here and a 0 here. So you can put the 1 in, but now to get the 0 here and shift everything, you can use this insert key. So second function insert, and the cursor actually subtly changed. It was a black rectangle, and now it's clear, just flashing. And now if I type 0, everything shifts over, and now I have, yay, the graph that I wanted to have. So there's one little thing that this can do, and I want to show you one other thing with piecewise functions that's kind of neat that people don't always know about. So I'm going to clear those out. I'm going to go back to a nice standard setting of -10 to +10, -10 to +10. And let's just graph a line like 2x. So there's the line. But what if you want to restrict that line so you just get like a chunk, maybe from 0 to about here or so, or maybe even up to the top. You just get this line to the top, and it doesn't show up down here. And if I were to go further, it doesn't show. Maybe I'll go just up to 4, and then it'll end right about here. So here's how you can do that. First of all, instead of the function, just use brackets like this, and then divide it. And we're going to set up a couple of numbers to divide it by. The first thing is I wanted it to be above 0, like in my x direction. So under this menu of test, you can start to pick greater than and less than. So I'm going to pick that the x values have to be greater than or equal to, that's number 4, 0. And, oops, I didn't get the 0, 0. And I'm also going to have it less than 4. I think I said on the graph I wanted it between 0 and 4 in the x direction. So x has to be, go back into that test menu, less than or equal to, which is 6, and 4. Now, and again, it didn't grab that 4. There we go. Now what this is doing with this division statement is it's dividing it by some tests, some mathematical tests. And the graphing calculator, if the test is true, so if x is bigger than 0, gives a value of 1. So anytime you use a test and it gives a true statement, it gives a value of 1. And anytime it gives a false statement, it gives a value of 0. So this can give values of 1 for all x values bigger than 0, and you'll get values of 1 here for all x values less than 4. So 0, 0.1, 0.2, all the way up to 4 will return a 1 for this statement and a 1 for this statement. And 1, now I'm using multiplication here, 1 times 1 is division by 1, and you just get your function. But if either of these are false, or both of them are false, it can't be in this case, but if either of these are false, then it returns a 0. So if x is actually less than 0, like -6, you get 0 times this value, which would be 1, 0 times 1, which is 0, and you have division by 0, and division by 0 doesn't show up as a coordinate. So this idea will actually produce a graph that is just a chunk and ends from 0 to 4 in the x direction. And it's really nice to use this to be able to create little chunks of any kind of algebra you want. So you could again, you need brackets around the top part, so you could do 2x plus 10, and you could say, okay, I just want this to show up between, so you set up double brackets, like a big bracket with multiplication happening on the inside. You could say x would have to be less than, and it doesn't matter which order you do this in, do greater than 0, and x also has to be, so there's your multiplication. This bracket x greater than 0, and this bracket x is less than or equal to, which was number 6, say 4 again, and close the brackets and graph, and now you'll get that other function, and you've got two little piecewise functions. You can actually use this to join them together. I have done transformations units where I get students to take little pieces, transform them around, and create pictures on their graphing calculator. It's helpful if you use the graph database and the draw and storage programs to store a number of things in. There's a couple other little tricks that you can do, one of which I'll show you next on this video, that is really helpful for graphing multiple lines. Okay, well, let's do that next. So I'll clear these out. And what if I wanted to be maybe teaching students how slope works? So I could graph, like y equals 2x, y equals 3x. Could even make some of them bold, y equals 4x. It could be really crazy and do like -x. And I could go and have it graph all these. I could say, okay, well, there's a slope of 2, there's a slope of 3, there's a slope of 4, here's a slope of -1. What do you notice? And that takes up a lot of room on here, and there's some benefits to doing that. You can turn them on and off easily, but I can graph all of those in one line. And I'll just turn these off so you can see how to do that. So I'm only going to be graphing this first one. And what you do is you use these yellow set brackets. So I set up my brackets, and I have 2, and my next slope that I wanted to graph was 3, and my next slope that I wanted to graph was 4, and the last slope was -1. And I want it to graph all of those things with x. So I want to graph 2x, then 3x, then 4x, then -x. And notice these are all turned off. It will only be graphing this one, and I get the exact same graph that I had before. There it graphs 2, now it graphs 3, then it graphs 4, and then it graphs -1. Some beautiful things that this graphing calculator can do, and there's some more of the advanced features for you.